The galaxy had always looked at humans as weak creatures who had little to offer in the way of war or power. To the great empires, humans were a race of scavengers who survived by picking up the remains of other civilizations. They were known for walking through the ashes of battles, gathering the broken pieces of warships, dragging back chunks of twisted steel, and stripping apart machines that no one else cared about. The other species laughed at this sight and called humans the junk collectors of the stars. In their eyes, humans were too small and too fragile to fight with the great powers, and so they were left to crawl in the dirt and gather what was left behind. But something strange was happening in those quiet scrapyards that the empires did not notice at first. While alien fleets polished their sleek war machines and upgraded their perfect weapons, humans were in the shadows of forgotten battlefields hammering broken metal together and welding shattered armor into new forms. They were not wasting time with pride or beauty. Their ships were ugly and mismatched, patched with steel plates of different colors, powered by engines that rattled and screamed, and armed with weapons stolen from a dozen different enemies. They looked like nothing but flying wrecks. To any alien eye, they looked ready to fall apart at the first strike. Yet rumors began to spread that these ships did not fall apart at all. Whispers carried from sector to sector. A fleet of pirates had attacked a human convoy and never returned. A proud admiral had sent 5 ships to destroy what he thought were helpless scavengers, and not a single one of those ships came back. What had once been a joke was becoming a quiet fear. The empires wanted to believe it was chance or luck or lies spread by frightened traitors. But every story carried the same detail. The humans had used ships built from scrap, and those ships had torn apart vessels that should have crushed them in moments. The first alien commander to face one of these so-called junk ships had laughed when it appeared on his scanner. The thing was a disgrace to the art of war. Its armor was layered unevenly, its surface covered with scars and burns. Its engines roared louder than they should, unstable and angry. Its weapons did not match, one side carrying plasma cannons, the other side bolted with kinetic launchers that belonged to another species entirely. To the commander, it looked like a desperate machine built by creatures who did not understand proper design. He expected victory within minutes, but then something happened that he could not explain. His fleet fired volley after volley at the junk ship, and every shot seemed to vanish against its patchwork armor. The strange mix of alien shields and human steel bent and groaned, but it did not break. When he scanned again, he realized the humans had fused together different technologies, stolen pieces that should never have worked in harmony, yet somehow did. What the empires had abandoned as useless, humans had made into something unpredictable and strong. Panic spread among his crew as the junk ship moved with surprising speed. It should not have been able to maneuver like that. It should not have been able to fire with such precision. Yet it did, and each strike landed where it hurt most. His proud warship cracked under weapons it did not understand. His fleet turned in confusion, shouting commands that made no sense anymore. The commander stared at the screen and felt fear growing in his chest. He was not fighting a scavenger. He was fighting something else, something that was born from the broken remains of every empire's arrogance. He realized too late that humans were not weak. They had studied every weapon, every defense, every mistake the galaxy had ever made. And now they had forged those lessons into monsters of metal and fire. When his flagship shuddered from the first hit and alarms screamed across the deck, the commander knew this was not an accident. The rumors had been true. The humans had built something new, something that was both terrifying and unstoppable. His last thought before the lights went dark was that this ship made of scraps was not a failure at all. It was the most dangerous machine he had ever faced, and as more of these junk ships rose from the shadows of scrapyards across human space, the galaxy began to ask a question it had never considered before. If humans could turn the trash of empires into weapons this deadly, then what would happen when they were done collecting scraps and started building on purpose? The story of the scavengers was no longer one of laughter. It was becoming one of fear. The wreckage of the alien commander's fleet drifted in silence across the void, twisted metal glowing faintly in the light of distant suns. What had once been a proud armada was now only scattered debris. Among the wrecks, the human ship moved slowly, its engines coughing smoke and sparks, its armor dented and scorched. To any passing eye, it would look like a survivor that had barely escaped with life, but the truth was very different. Inside that broken shell, the humans were calm. They had won, and they had learned. Every battle was not only survival but a lesson, and every enemy ship that fell became another piece of knowledge added to their growing arsenal. News of the destruction spread faster than light across the trade lanes. Merchants whispered to one another. Smugglers spoke in hushed tones in shadowy ports, and even soldiers of rival empires carried the story back to their home worlds. At first, many dismissed it. They said the commander had been careless, that he had underestimated his enemy, that the humans had only gotten lucky. But deep inside their words lay a seed of doubt. Luck could not explain everything. Weeks later, another battle came, this time on the edge of a heavily patrolled system belonging to a proud empire. A convoy of alien warships had been tasked to intercept what intelligence claimed was a human raiding party. When the enemy ships appeared, the officers burst into laughter. The humans had brought what looked like rusting machines. Some ships had holes patched with plates of metal that did not even fit correctly. Others were so loud with engine noise that their signatures could be tracked across entire sectors. The alien fleet commander ordered his ships to advance, confident that the humans would fall quickly. But when the first strike came, reality shifted. The human ships moved in strange ways, turning too fast, shifting position as if the chaos of their designs gave them freedom. Plasma bursts that should have shattered their hulls bent away at the last second, sliding across shield layers stitched together from technologies no one else had dared to combine. The humans did not fight with elegance. They fought with fury. Every missile they launched was filled with scrap metal sharpened into blades, exploding into storms that tore through sleek armor and cut ships into pieces. The alien crews panicked. Their weapons were designed to fight order with order, precision against precision. But these human ships were built for chaos. Each one was different, unpredictable, filled with traps and hidden weapons. One ship looked half dead until it suddenly revealed a cannon powered by 3 stolen reactors, firing a beam that split a cruiser in half. Another ship pretended to lose power, drifting as if it were a corpse until enemy vessels came close enough to board. Then it erupted in fire, unleashing swarms of drones made from melted fighters, each one stabbing into engines and detonating. The battle turned into a massacre. By the end, the human ships were smoking ruins, their hulls dented, their lights flickering. But they were alive. The alien fleet was gone. Only silence remained, broken by the faint hum of human engines as they gathered what was left of their enemies and carried the parts back to their scrapyards. The galaxy could not laugh anymore. The humans had turned weakness into a weapon. Every empire that had once mocked them began to reconsider. How could a species so fragile fight with such power? The answer was hidden in the hearts of those who had lived too long under the shadow of stronger civilizations. Humans had learned from the beginning that survival meant using everything, wasting nothing, turning failure into strength. Where others saw broken metal, humans saw possibilities. Where others abandoned weapons, humans found secrets. They had studied every empire in silence, and now the silence was breaking. Inside the scrapyards, human engineers worked without rest. They carried pieces of alien reactors, fragments of shielding, shards of armor, and broken weapons into massive factories. Sparks flew day and night. Children of miners and traders became builders of nightmares. They did not design their ships to be pretty, they designed them to win. No 2 ships were the same, and that was the secret. An empire could study one and learn nothing about the next. The great councils of the galaxy began to meet in fear. Admirals sat around tables whispering about the rise of the junk fleet. Some wanted to strike fast, to burn human space before the threat grew worse. Others argued that doing so would risk more losses, and no empire wished to waste its fleets. The question rose in every chamber, unspoken but heavy in the air. If humans could do this with scraps, what would they become if they had access to the full resources of a world? In the darkness of the scrapyards, the answer was already forming. More ships were being built, bigger than before, heavier, sharper, faster. Each one carried the lessons of the last battle. Each one carried the scars of human determination. They were no longer just survivors. They were becoming predators. And though the galaxy did not yet know it, the age of laughter had ended. A new age was beginning, forged in fire and wreckage. The next time the humans appeared in battle, they would not come with only a handful of junk ships. They would come with an entire fleet. And the galaxy, for the first time in centuries, would know what fear truly meant. The empires had always believed in perfection. Their ships were built with symmetry, their weapons designed with elegance, their fleets organized like machines that moved without flaw. To them, war was a dance of precision, and the one who held the most refined blade would always win. But the arrival of the human scrapyard fleet had broken that belief. These strange vessels, patched with scars and screaming engines, fought like storms instead of soldiers. They did not move as one but as many, each different, each unpredictable. Against them, perfection was no shield. Perfection became weakness. In the halls of the empire that had suffered the greatest loss, voices rose in anger and shame. How could they explain to their people that a group of scavengers had destroyed an armada? How could they admit that their polished machines had been outmatched by broken metal, held together with rust and desperation? Their leaders declared that the next battle would not be the same. They would send their best. They would send not a patrol, not a convoy, but an armada of their finest warships, the pride of their empire, a fleet that had never known defeat. With it would sail their most feared flagship, a fortress of steel that had crushed entire rebellions by itself. The humans heard of this fleet long before it arrived. Traders carried the warnings, smugglers whispered the names of the ships, and spies passed along stolen data. But instead of fear, the news brought a quiet determination to the scrapyards. The engineers worked faster, welding with sparks that lit the night skies above their colonies. Families brought their dead machines, old engines, broken reactors, anything that could burn one more hour in battle. Children gathered scrap in baskets, handing it to builders with wide eyes, as if they understood the future was being forged in their hands. The human fleet that rose from the scrapyards this time was larger than ever before. Some ships were huge, patched together from the skeletons of 3 different battleships. Others were small and sharp, fast enough to dart between giants. Each one carried its own story of survival. Some had plates of alien armor welded over human steel. Others had weapons stripped from half a dozen cultures bolted onto their decks. None of them were alike, and that was their strength. To study them was useless because there was no pattern, no code, no design that could be predicted. When the Empire's armada finally arrived at the border of human space, the galaxy held its breath. Never before had so many of the Empire's ships gathered in one place. They moved like a sea of silver, their engines silent, their weapons glowing with deadly light. At their center was the flagship, a colossal beast larger than a city, armed with more firepower than entire fleets. Its surface shone with flawless armor. Its name alone carried fear. Against it, the human fleet looked like a swarm of beggars clinging to scraps. Their hulls were jagged, their engines smoked, their lights flickered. To the alien eyes watching from far away, it looked like the battle had already been decided. But the humans did not see weakness. They saw possibility. Every scar was a memory. Every mismatched plate was proof of survival. Every broken piece was turned into a weapon. As the fleets faced one another in silence, the human ships powered up. Their engines roared like wild animals. Their hulls shook with energy, pulled from reactors that should not have been able to hold together. And when the signal came, they moved. The Empire expected order. They expected ranks of ships advancing in clean lines. What they faced instead was chaos. The human fleet scattered in every direction, each ship moving as if on its own, weaving and twisting like predators hunting prey. The Empire's guns fired into the void, missing targets that refused to stay still. The humans struck not where the enemy was strong, but where it was blind. A small junk ship rammed itself into the side of a cruiser, its hull tearing open as it exploded, ripping the alien vessel apart with it. Another ship released clouds of scrap metal into the path of energy weapons, scattering beams into wild directions. The Empire's admirals shouted orders, but nothing worked. Their ships could not predict where the humans would strike next. They were machines trying to fight madness, and madness was winning. One by one, the polished vessels cracked under the fury of weapons that looked crude, but struck with perfect brutality. Human ships burned, but even in burning they killed. Some tore themselves open to unleash reactors that consumed entire squadrons in fire. Others faked death, drifting until enemies closed in before erupting in sudden violence. The flagship entered the battle like a god, its weapons lighting up the darkness. It cut through human ships with waves of fire, each blast destroying multiple targets at once, but even as it killed, the swarm closed around it. The humans did not fear death. To them, every ship was both weapon and shield. The flagship's hull groaned as smaller vessels slammed against it, exploding, tearing at its perfect armor. Its guns kept firing, but for every human ship destroyed, 2 more filled the gap. The battle turned into something the Empire had never imagined. Their perfection was being eaten alive by the chaos of human survival. For the first time in centuries, their admiral felt doubt, and as the swarm closed in tighter, the fear spread across the entire empire. If humans could bring an armada to its knees with ships made from garbage, what would they become if they ever gained real power? The question hung heavy as the battle raged on, and deep inside the flagship, alarms began to scream. The perfect fortress of the Empire was being torn apart piece by piece, and outside, the junk fleet howled like wolves in the night. The flagship stood like a mountain in the void, its silver hull reflecting the light of distant suns. To the Empire, it was the symbol of order, the fortress that no enemy had ever breached. Entire rebellions had ended when this ship appeared. Its name was spoken in fear across the galaxy, a reminder that perfection could not be broken. But now that fortress was surrounded by a storm unlike anything it had faced before. The human junk fleet swirled around it, tearing at its shields with every weapon they had, screaming engines drowning out the silence of space. Inside the command chamber of the flagship, the admiral stood firm, his eyes fixed on the chaos outside. He had been raised to believe that no enemy could match the Empire's might, and he refused to accept that scavengers could threaten him. He ordered his gunners to unleash every weapon, and the flagship obeyed. Beams of pure energy ripped through human ships, explosions lit up the dark, and wreckage scattered like ash. To any outsider, it looked as though the humans were breaking. But even as their ships shattered, the swarm did not retreat. Each fallen vessel became another weapon, drifting toward the flagship and detonating against its flawless armor. The admiral watched as the screens filled with alarms. Small breaches along the hull, weapon systems flickering, power surges rolling through the engines. The human swarm was not strong because of individual ships. It was strong because every single one of them fought without fear. Every single one willing to die if it meant tearing another piece from the Empire's pride. Where the Empire prized survival of the fleet, humans prized victory no matter the cost. And that difference was breaking the perfect machine. One human ship, nothing more than a skeleton patched with metal plates, pushed itself directly into the flagship's path. Its engines burned white, forcing its wrecked frame forward until it slammed into the shields. The impact should have shattered it into dust, but instead it clung to the energy field, its hull grinding against invisible walls. Alarms screamed louder as the shield buckled under the weight. Then the human ship detonated, its broken core releasing a wave of fire that cracked the shield wide open. For the first time in centuries, the flagship's armor was exposed. The swarm rushed in. Human vessels hurled themselves through the gap, launching storms of scrap missiles and energy bursts from stolen cannons. The flagship shook violently, its guns firing in all directions, tearing apart dozens of attackers. But still they came. The chaos had no end, no limit. To the admiral, it felt as if the humans had become the storm itself, and his perfect fleet was drowning inside it. All across the Empire, watchers sat in silence as they saw the impossible unfold. Their communication relays carried images of the flagship bleeding fire into the void. The junk fleet, those creatures of rust and desperation, had done what no great enemy had ever managed. They had scarred the Empire's pride, and the knowledge of that wound spread faster than any ship could fly. Still, the admiral refused to bow. He roared commands, demanding that every last weapon be brought to bear. He would burn the swarm even if it meant burning the stars around him. His crew obeyed, but their voices trembled, for even they could see the truth. The Empire's perfect weapon was faltering, and the scavengers were not stopping. Another human ship, smaller than the rest, drifted close. Its hull was silent, its lights dark, as if it were only wreckage. The admiral ignored it, focusing on larger targets. But then the wreck came alive. Hidden thrusters fired, and the small vessel pierced straight into the flagship's side, lodging deep into the armor. Before defenses could react, the little ship exploded, tearing a jagged hole that revealed the inner corridors of the fortress. Now the humans had an opening. Dozens more ships swarmed into the breach, firing wildly, flooding the flagship with destruction. The admiral felt the ground beneath him shudder as explosions ripped through the decks. He knew then that perfection had been broken not by stronger weapons or greater numbers, but by something his empire had never understood. Humans thrived in the broken, the imperfect, the chaotic. They were not bound by rules of order. They made war into madness, and madness was their greatest strength. The galaxy, watching from afar, felt something it had not felt in generations. Fear. If humans could do this with nothing but scraps and ruin, What would they become if they ever turned their full world-building power into war? If they ever stopped scavenging and began forging weapons of their own? The thought alone was enough to send shivers through even the proudest empires. As the flagship groaned and its lights dimmed, the admiral stood in silence. The swarm still pressed against him, ripping piece after piece from the fortress he had trusted. The Empire would not forgive him if he failed, but deep inside he understood the truth. This was not his failure. This was the rise of something greater than his empire had ever imagined. The scavengers were no longer scavengers. They had become predators. The last message that left the flagship before its signal cut was a single sentence, carried across every listening station and every fleet. Beware the junk fleet. They turn our pride into their weapons. They turn our waste into our end. And with that, the ship that had been the Empire's symbol vanished into the storm of fire, leaving behind only wreckage, fear, and silence. The wreck of the Empire's flagship drifted in the endless dark, its broken frame glowing faintly as fires burned inside. What had once been a symbol of perfection, a fortress feared across the stars, was now only another piece of scrap floating in silence. Around it the junk fleet gathered, their engines crackling, their hulls scarred, their shapes twisted and ugly. To any outsider they looked half dead, as though the battle had destroyed them. But the truth was far more dangerous. They were alive, and their victory had changed the galaxy forever. Messages spread like wildfire. Traders whispered in every port. Soldiers muttered in every barrack. Smugglers told stories in every hidden corner. The humans had destroyed the Empire's pride. They had taken the strongest fleet the galaxy had ever seen and torn it apart with machines built from waste. The laughter that had once followed the scavenger species was gone. In its place grew silence, heavy and uneasy, a silence filled with the weight of fear. Across the galaxy the councils of the great powers gathered. Admirals pounded their fists against tables demanding answers. Politicians shouted that something had to be done before the humans grew stronger. But none of them spoke the truth that lingered behind their arguments. They were afraid. They were afraid because they understood something they had refused to believe for too long. Humans had no need for perfection to win. They needed only survival, and survival had turned them into something unstoppable. In the scrapyards, the celebration was quiet. Humans did not sing or dance in victory. They worked. They pulled the remains of the Empire's fleet back to their colonies. Every broken cannon, every shattered engine, every twisted plate of armor was carried into their factories. Sparks flew again, and the sound of welding filled the air. The humans knew that their enemies would come again, and they knew the next war would be larger. So they built not for beauty, not for pride, but for survival. The children who once carried scraps in baskets now carried tools. The elders who once repaired farming machines now repaired weapons. Entire worlds became forges, and the people themselves became the heartbeat of their rising power. Where the empires hoarded resources and designed fleets in secret, the humans shared everything. Every ship carried the lessons of the last. Every battle scar was a guide for the next fight. What looked like chaos from the outside was in truth a web of knowledge. Each ship a piece of a greater whole. The empires argued endlessly about how to stop them. Some demanded alliances, believing that only a united front could crush the scavengers before they grew further. Others argued that the humans should be left alone, that war against them would cost more than anyone could afford. A few even whispered of seeking peace, of offering trade and friendship, but their voices were drowned by fear and pride. None of them realized that their indecision was the very fuel humans needed. While the empires argued, the scrapyards burned day and night with the fire of creation. The next time human ships appeared beyond their borders, they did not come as raiders. They came as conquerors. Their fleet had grown larger, filled with ships patched from a dozen wars, armed with weapons that no empire had dared to combine. They struck without warning, not for glory but for survival, seizing resources, dismantling enemy stations, ripping apart fleets that tried to resist. The galaxy watched in terror as system after system fell not to beauty, not to perfection, but to the storm of broken machines. What made the humans terrifying was not their weapons, but their will. Other empires fought to expand. Humans fought because they had always lived on the edge of extinction, and that had taught them a truth no empire wanted to face. Survival was not about strength alone. It was about using everything, wasting nothing, turning even death into a weapon. Every ship they lost became shrapnel for the next attack. Every defeat was turned into knowledge. The more they bled, the stronger they became. Legends spread faster than fleets. Stories of junk ships tearing through proud cruisers. Of human captains laughing as they rammed their vessels into enemy hulls. Of scrapyard cannons ripping empires apart. Children in alien worlds whispered these tales at night, and soldiers carried them like curses. The words that once mocked humans now became warnings. Junk fleet, scrap monsters, the ghosts of ruin. Each name carried the same meaning: do not face them, and yet no empire could ignore them. Trade routes bent around human space. Fleets refused to patrol near their borders, but still the junk ships appeared. They moved through shadows, striking without pattern, always vanishing into the scrapyards before enemies could regroup. Every empire knew the truth, but none dared to say it. The scavengers had become hunters, and the galaxy itself was their prey. On the edge of human space, deep in the largest scrapyard of them all, stood the frame of something even greater. It was larger than the flagship they had destroyed, patched together from the bones of countless battles. Its engines were stolen from 3 different empires, its weapons built from forbidden technologies no one else had ever dared to test. It was not yet complete, but when it was finished, it would be the single most dangerous ship ever to sail the stars. And it would not be built from pride, it would be built from ruin. The galaxy waited in silence, each empire holding its breath, afraid to move, afraid to strike, afraid to admit what they already knew. The age of perfection was over. The age of survival had begun. And at the center of that new age stood humanity, once mocked as scavengers, now feared as the masters of destruction. The final whisper carried across the stars, spoken by soldiers, traders, and rulers alike. Beware the junk fleet. Beware the humans. They will turn even your broken pride into their greatest weapon.